Hey, welcome back to the Motorcyclist Podcast, where we talk about motorcycles and what makes them so great. Topics on this show are constantly changing, but the one thing that remains the same is two-wheeled fun. On this episode, we're talking about middleweight supersports, which has become a bit of a generalized term because the class is splintered into a bunch of different categories. You've got your traditional inline-3 and 4 supersports, which are like based on like super hardcore race bikes. Now you've got some next gen super sports, which are softer, a little less racy, but still very much a super sport. And now you've got a lower spec middleweight sport bike, which is kind of an evolution of middleweight twins, and which were considered a starting place for track riders, the casual street rider, but are still definitely capable on the track and in the canyons. So before we get into talking about all those bikes, we got to make some introductions. We've got Adam Wahid, editor. We've got Bradley, in-market editor. And you got myself, Justin Dawes, executive editor. So before we get into talking about all these cool bikes and the evolution of super sports and how things have changed, let's talk about what we've been riding. Adam, let's start with you. What have you been riding this week?
Lately, I've been riding Suzuki's 2024 GSX-S1000 GX Plus. Strange name, cool bike.
That is a lot of numbers and letters in there, man. Like,
yes,
they gotta chill out.
They love their letters. Yeah, gotta
plus.
have the plus.
Why is everyone adding a plus to the end of their
not PLUS?
Yes.
Plus sign.
Yeah, plus sign. It's not the only one that has a plus sign at the end of it now. That's the funny part. There's multiple bikes that have that. It's very, very odd.
Yeah, I totally agree.
You like
cool
it?
Bike though. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. It's it's not the best Suzuki I've ridden, but it's not the worst either. So yeah, it's okay. Cool to see them.
Does that one have the engine based on the K5 though? Is it still a K5 engine on that one?
Yeah, yep. Still, tried and true powertrain, but it's cool that they're trying to compete, with BMW Motorrad with its, adventure sport bike, and it's cool to see a motorcycle manufacturer add a new product to their lineup.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
good for Suzuki.
Yeah, basically, engine and chassis are really. They're a little bit outdated at this point, but it is. I remember riding that bike. It is still pretty impressive. I mean, it's typical Suzuki in a lot of ways, where it's like, yeah, no, this works. Gets the job done for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yep. What about you, Bradley? What's your ride this week?
It's a non-motorcycle, but I do have to give a shout out. So we've got two of these little gas Moto 1 e-bikes at the office right now. And so Evan and I have been like commuting over, grabbing lunch on those things. And for me, it's my first time riding those little e-bikes. Dude, I love that thing. And it's so crazy because I wanted to call these things out because, first off, when they first showed up, I was like, what are we going to really do with these things? Like, we're going to actually use them. I use that thing so much, whether it's here at the office, run around go grab lunch on it. At home, I live in an area kind of butts up against some hills, so I can cut up into the hills on some like little fire roads and little canyon roads, and it feels like almost like I'm going for like a little motorcycle ride on the thing. It's so much fun. It's so cool. I just like massive shout out to those guys for what they've done. Like, it's an e-bike, but it's like got the big gas logos and these like fenders on it that kind of have the like moto inspiration, and like I think it's such a cool solution. Like, it's totally opened my eyes to the benefits of e-bikes for sure. And also, like, you would not believe how many people like take a second look at that thing or stop and look it over. Like, it's incredible. Like, more so than any motorcycle I've ridden in the last 6 months. That thing gets more attention. It's shocking.
Like, all age ranges, right? Like,
everything.
There's kids looking at it, and like, over by the office, especially in Irvine, you see so many, young kids, in their, on their way to junior high or high school, riding those things as their transportation instead of a bicycle. It's really rad to see because each one of those could eventually become a motorcycle buyer and somebody that joins our club, right? And that's what's really rad is you know, we had a generation that didn't seem like they want to do anything but play video games and stay glued inside of their TV, and now they're all out there popping wheelies, riding these things, and eventually they're going to want more power, and they're going to want to go further places, and they're going to buy motorcycles. And I think that's going to be the saving grace of motorcycling in years to come.
Yeah, and like I said, I love what Gas has done, where there's now that even stronger connection between an e-bike and the moto world. Just in terms of styling and everything. And it's massive shout out to those guys for bringing that thing to market. I think it's really cool. And for sure, if I think you're in the market for an e-bike, or like always, I think my thing was always, I was kind of curious if it would be a good tool or if it would just sit in the garage and collect dust. And my big learning so far is that you absolutely will spend more time on that thing than you expected. So
that's rad. Super.
What about
rad.
you, man? Did you get to ride anything lately?
No, this week I didn't ride anything. We're coming up on Christmas, and we got lots of content we got to get up. Almost everyone's going to be out of the office for at least a week and a half, if not 2 weeks, which means we got to have a bunch of stuff front loaded. And so I've been working my butt off to make sure that everybody has something to read on the website while we're taking a break.
Yep. Hopefully going riding. Yep.
Oh, definitely going riding. That is a given. As much as possible. Yeah. So.
Oh, fun fact. I get to go. I'm taking my nephew's dirt bike riding this weekend for the first time.
Oh, awesome. Well,
so that's, speaking of is that kind of that time, right? And so like, okay, we can pull a day here. And so nephews around 10 and 13 be the first time.
Oh, super
they finally asked. They're like, we'd like to go ride. Okay, cool.
Cool. Yep. That's awesome. When they ask, that's the radness. My nephews, they were always kind of into it, but they never were like super into it. Like they all had bikes and stuff, but they wouldn't like, it wasn't like their first thing they wanted to do. And so, you know, when I would go visit them and stuff, they wouldn't want to go riding. And I tried a couple of times, like, hey, let's go riding and I'll show you how to do this. And it just didn't work out, you know? And so it's kind of a bummer, but now they're older. And now all of a sudden they've really gotten into it. One of my nephews, he's in his 20s now, but he like did his first dirt bike race 2 weekends ago or 3 weekends ago, and I was like, yeah, proud uncle.
Nice.
Like, you know, like he went out and bought himself a new 250 KTM. He built it for desert racing. Like,
nice.
Signed up for the amateur class or the novice class, got like middle of the pack, but he was like super proud of himself, and he did it all on his own. Dad didn't help him. I didn't help him. Like, he did it on his own, and I'm like, rats. At least he's finally getting
That's cool.
It. Took him a while, but he's getting it. Yeah. So I'm cool. I was really proud of him for doing that.
Yeah, that's cool. That's our whole hope here, right? It's just like, just share the love of motorcycling, right? That's why we're all in this. We love it, and it's like, hey, if you love it half as much as we do, you're probably going to enjoy it and get to
Yeah, exactly. We want everyone to join our club, join our family, right? It's for us, it's a way of life, and for a lot of people to get into motorcycling, it's a way of life, and we want to bring more people into that way of life. Join our cult. Join our cult of motorcycling, right?
Yeah.
So
we have fun over here.
Yeah, for sure. So this issue of the Super Sport, next gen super sports, middleweight super sports, like it's definitely an interesting evolution of a class, right?
Yeah.
So Bradley, why don't you you're the sport bike guy. You've raced these things. You're Adam's a super fast dude too. I like track days and all that stuff, but Bradley's a racer, Adam's a ripper. I can get by. So Bradley, let's start with you on kind of introducing us to what this is all about. Like, what are we talking about here?
This is going to be a tough one for me to get through because I feel pretty passionately about this, and I recognize that it's because of my background, and that my background is a little bit unique, I think, compared to most people, and therefore my opinions are maybe a little bit different. But so it'll be kind of interesting to see where this conversation kind of goes. But I think the thing for me that I really wanted to kick this off with and start talking about is, we talk about, in a lot of ways, the death of the traditional sport bike. But before we talk about that and all these new options, these street-oriented bikes that we're starting to see, I do want to remind and call out that there are still proper 600s out there that you can go buy. The class is not as dead as I think sometimes it's perceived, right? So you can still go buy a Honda CBR 600RR. Now we're already getting into like little, asterisks because
it's
the CBR 600,
long in the tooth.
the one in the States is
yes. The one in the States
one
is
in
very
the
long
States,
in the tooth.
From research, the last update for that bike, this like sounds like a joke, was 2013. Like absurd. But you can still go buy a CBR 600, which at one point, a long time ago, was a race-proven machine and still has that track pedigree. You can go buy a Kawasaki ZX6R, 636 cc, proper inline-four sport bike. That was actually updated for 2024.
Yeah.
So Kawasaki did actually show some love to the category and to traditional sport bikes, or I should say super sport machines, into that super sport category last year. Not a big overhaul. It was basically to bring that engine, that 636, up to Euro 5 plus compliance. A few other, styling tweaks and things like that. The bike already had a few electronics, like a traction control and ride modes. It's not the latest and greatest by any stretch of the imagination, but they did update that bike last year. You can buy one new on the dealership floor, and we rode the thing at the Ridge up in Washington, and we all were just blown away. Just a reminder of how
you
good
forget, right?
a proper 600cc super sport is.
Yeah, because we don't ride them that often anymore because the manufacturers,
outdated.
They're outdated. The manufacturers don't put a lot of effort into updating them, and that means that we don't get like an invitation to a press launch or they even have a loaner because they're like, it's the same bike. Like we're not going to put any effort into it. So we forget how fun 600 super sports can be, right?
Yep. So Honda, Kawasaki, you can still go get GSXR 600 and GSXR 750. Yes, outdated. I think the last update for those was 2011. So I guess technically even further back than the Hondas. And
how dare you slight the GSXR 750?
Oh, don't. No, I could never. Such a great street bike. I mean, the funny thing about that is, so actually first, I wanted to mention two things. When I mentioned the Honda, even the Kawasaki and the Suzuki, they're still getting new colors and graphics almost every year, I think. I was looking, new Honda, it's got this like really cool gray paint scheme to it. Like it looks sharp. GSXR 600, 750. They've got, I think one of those had like a weird like orange color to it, but otherwise they do have, these manufacturers are pumping new graphics and new colorways each year. So you can still go buy these bikes if you want that traditional 600cc super sport experience. You don't have your, especially on the Suzukis, the last bikes I've mentioned here, you don't have your TFT displays. Obviously, you don't have any really electronics. You've got a couple ride modes and things like that, but you don't have
some ABS,
your cornering ABS, your cornering traction control. You don't have all that stuff, but a proper inline-four 600 and a really, track-focused chassis, you've got those things, right? Which is I think the key elements to that traditional 600cc experience. And then you've got, MV Agusta F3, right? And that's obviously a little bit of an upper echelon type thing, but and they're quite a bit more expensive. But you can typically, if you want that, traditional super sport experience, you can get that. The price on these things is a little tough.
Yeah, the RC trim on the F3. My God, $26,000. Like,
it's a little bit absurd. The other thing is the Honda is $12,200. I can't really wrap. You think that? I don't know.
I don't think that's bad.
The bike's from 2013.
Yeah, but I mean, just think about inflation. Like everyone always goes, "Oh my God, it's so much more expensive." But the dollar value has changed so much because of inflation, especially since 2013. Like what was that thing in 2013? It was probably $8,000. If you put 2000,
I can look. I didn't look.
2013, $8,000. I bet you're really close to 12 grand right now. Like it's probably still the same price. Effectively.
That being said, Kawasaki ZX6, which again, you got the 636 engine, which has, that extra little, torque and that mid-range performance, through that 636. Now the new one with the Euro 5 compliant, it doesn't really have the top end that it did before. It kind of tapers off, but really good, relatively modern bike for it's 11.4 to 12.4, I think. So like it's updated last year, relatively new bike, all that new styling. That's a pretty good value. And I think that was really where I wanted to start this conversation. We talk so much about these newer bikes, R7s, R9s, R660s, all of these things. And I think sometimes we do a disservice by not remembering and recalling that, hey, there are these traditional super sports out there that you can still get. And, in some cases, in the case of the Cowie, it's a pretty decent value, I think, so sure. if
especially if you're into like track day riding at all, like, man, these things are a blast on a track. Like Adam, like, you've spent a lot of time on the track, and, me personally, I would prefer to ride a 600 than 1,000 just because it gives you some time to think and you can like kind of push the limits a little bit more. But Adam, what do you think about these bikes in the modern area, track day weapons? Like, what's your take on it?
I mean, you guys mentioned it earlier, like we don't really have the opportunity to operate these type of products very much anymore. So, on the rare occasion we do, it's a trip down memory lane. Like, wow, these things are awesome. Like, why doesn't everyone ride this bike every day? Because they have so much, performance and sensation when you're operating it, on the street or the racetrack. And yeah, I mean, they're just cool bikes, but, unfortunately, the US motorcycle market has shifted and people aren't buying these products in, tens of thousands like they were in the, 90s. So things have shifted, but that's not to say that these bikes aren't totally cool and totally high performance. They are. And it's really neat to see, motorcycle manufacturers like Kawasaki, while the Ninja ZX6R isn't anything special in the performance department, it's cool that they're, fitting new bodywork. They're fitting new features and benefits to cater to a modern rider. And, I've seen that Ninja ZX6R at a dealership, and especially in its, 90s, livery. And that thing's a cool looking bike. Like, that's a cool looking bike, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love that. I love that livery, the the kind of old school green, white, and blue.
White, green,
set.
Yeah, blue, not purple. It'd be even cooler if it was purple.
Oh, dude, I wish.
Yeah, right.
My first sport bike. So I was working at Kawasaki corporate. I was 19 years old, and in the department I worked in, everyone got a bike to ride for the year. And basically everyone kind of divvied everything up. And by the time I started working there was only one bike left, and it was a ZX7 RR. That was my first, and I rode that thing as a commuter. Flat slide carbs. The thing, when it was hot, it wouldn't even start. Like, I had to bump start it. You couldn't start it on the starter. But I have such good memories of that thing. Like, so that's why, like, I really think the GSXR 750 is still super rad. Just a 750, like, those used to be the super bikes, right? And I have a little soft spot in my heart for a 750 inline-four because of my first sport bike at 19.
Yeah, and same for me. I raced a GSXR 600 for a couple of years, probably one of my favorite race bikes. And so, yeah, I obviously love a GSXR. I think I don't just love it because of my experience with it, but like the chassis feedback that you get through a GSXR 600 or 750 is incredible. I think there's such great track weapons. I think for someone who wants to go out and improve their skill set and really grow as a rider, if you're working towards that, where you want to go racing and things like that, I think there is still something to be said for a traditional super sport. So yeah, I was just excited to kind of kick this conversation off by calling some attention to those things and just mentioning that, hey, they are still out there, and we're going to obviously throughout the next couple, 30 minutes here, we're going to go into all these new options and kind of where this category has gone. But a reminder, that there are these bikes that you can go get. And while outdated, in terms of, not outdated in terms of like chassis performance and things like that necessarily, but the dash and the electronics, they're still there. They still exist.
Sure. And
they're not gone.
I'm going to raid on your play a little bit. They do take more effort to ride properly than some of these new
100%.
options, because you've got an inline-four that's just, all the power's up on top. You really got to pay attention to where you're at, in the rev range, and really rev the crap out of them to get everything you want out of them.
Yep. We all remember the old R6s, right?
Yeah.
It's like
exactly.
trying to ride an R6 on the street and just no bottom or mid range at all.
Exactly. And you've got chassis that are, or I should say ergonomics that are very, very tight and very demanding on your body for any time longer than a track session. So, I mean, that's maybe part of the reason, because they became so knife edged and so specialized that, we lost some people that way. There's some other reasons, and maybe we'll talk about that after we talk about these other bikes. But I really want to cover the next gen super sport models. So these are next gen bikes that are kind of the next kind of thing. They're a little bit softer. They're a little bit more manageable in the street. They're more streetable. They're easier to live with on a day-to-day, but they still have a lot of performance. And, like Ducati just came out with a new Panigale V2, and a V2S, a new V-twin, 890cc, claimed 120 horsepower. The old bike, the old V2 had 155 horsepower, but we've got, a 30 to 35 pound lighter bike.
It's just the goals are different, right?
The goals are different. And Ducati's we want people to, the super sport racing category is still there in Moto America. It's still there in BSB. It's still there, but it's not as important of a goalpost as it used to be. And so they said, we got to make it so people want to ride these things more. And they have to be able to justify the bike a little bit better. So, you've got this Panigale V2, and then you've got Yamaha's YZF7, which we haven't ridden yet. Neither of these bikes, any of these bikes we're talking about in these next gen super sports, we haven't ridden yet. So we're basically going off of specs. But you've also got an 890, but it's a 3-cylinder. It's got 120 horsepower. It's got the same amount of torque of 69 foot-pounds as the Panigale V2, and this is a more approachable super sport as well. Like, you can see that it's still like a sport bike in terms of ergonomics and stuff, but it seems to be one that you could live with more because it's got that super rad CP3, right? They're street bikes first. They're street bikes first before anything. Yeah. So, and then the other bike that is going to, we hope it's going to be joining the fold, but with KTM's recent announcement of restructuring and financial woes, I think they said they're $3 billion in debt. So this project may get shelved. You never know. The future of KTM is uncertain, but the 990 RCR, another twin, claimed 128 horsepower. It's maybe going to be a little bit gnarlier in terms of ergonomics and purpose than maybe some of the other ones, but it is it's looking pretty gnarly. And if it's the RC 8C is anything to go off of, it'll probably be pretty trick.
Yeah, I think so for sure. It was funny because I think I've got it in the notes here. They do actually still have a section on their website for this bike, despite it, it being technically a prototype or a concept still, right? Not officially announced. It says, this bike delivers unrivaled performance while embracing the practical demands of the road.
There you go.
That's what we're seeing across. You see that in the materials for the Ducati, Yamaha, and any of these bikes that we will, consider as part of this next gen super sport class or category. They always go back to mentioning road performance, compliance on the street. For sure, ergonomics are still relatively committed, but there's more thought put into it than there ever was on an R6 or a CBR 600, things like that. But yeah, in the materials and any of the marketing materials for these bikes, road comes in before they mention track in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And that's where this category is at now, it seems like.
Yeah. And not to get it wrong, they're still going to be exceptional handlers, but they may just not be as sharp as the old traditional super sport, which is understandable because you're making a bike that needs to work on the street and be comfortable.
Yeah, let's be honest. And again, I keep mentioning an R6 because that was, the bike of the class for so long. Everything that Yamaha ever did in terms of the development process for an R6 was for winning races, right? It was for competition. And I can't remember how you put it earlier, Justin, but that's no longer the case. They would love to. They and I think we'll talk about it a little bit, but with the R9, Yamaha's already done a lot of testing for their World Supersport program. And obviously they care about it, but it is not the driving force behind the development of these bikes.
No, not at all.
We also have
Definitely
our
not.
existing, true to their name, middleweight sport bikes, at least with the Aprilia RS660, which was introduced just a few years ago, I believe, for the 2021 model year in the United States. And then we have Suzuki's GSX 8R, which is also a new addition. The 8R bucks the trend of the 660 by using a little bit larger displacement engine. I believe the RS660 has a 659cc liquid-cooled parallel twin, where the Suzuki is a little bit larger at 776cc. But those are the bikes that companies like Yamaha with its YZF9 and Ducati with its Panigale V2, its new one, are trying to kind of go after is that segment, just with a little bit more displacement. We also have Triumph's Daytona 660, another 3-cylinder bike with a 660cc engine. So cool that Aprilia and Suzuki use parallel twins, and Triumph gives you an extra cylinder with its 3-cylinder engine. Then we have,
I mean, if Triumph has got to run a 3-cylinder, right? Like it's their jam, and they always sound super rad. And
anything with a Daytona name for sure,
Yeah, Daytona.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's interesting though, because this Daytona is not the Daytona of old, which would have fit in the traditional super sport category of being very hard edged.
They've cut it. Gone.
They've made this one more streetable and more accessible, and it's it's less than 10 grand. It's almost,
I will say, not
$9,000.
to jump ahead, I know, Adam, we still got some more bikes in this category, but this Daytona, I've ridden it, and I have absolutely no desire to ever go on a racetrack with that motorcycle in stock trim. It was not developed to be on a racetrack at all. It's
a street bike.
It is a street bike, 100%.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, this there are more bikes in this category, right, Adam, than any of the others, right? Because there's still more even.
We have another, interesting powertrain with, Honda's CBR 650R that they've had in the model lineup for a couple of years. It received some updates for this calendar year, and that thing's powered by Honda's tried and true 649cc inline-four engine, and this engine's not the same powertrain configuration as Honda's CBR 600RR, which is, a little bit smaller in displacement. And the engine architecture is not alike, but the extra displacement, again, gives you a little bit more torque, a little bit more, enjoyment for street riding. And again, it's cool to see a inline-four, a 3-cylinder, 2 parallel twins. We also have Kawasaki's Ninja 650, which joins the parallel twin ranks, another good affordable motorcycle. it's really neat to see. Kawasaki,
Yeah,
they have a really wide Ninja lineup.
and that 650 has been around for in different generations, but Kawasaki was one of the first to kind of go after this parallel twin sport bike thing. Like the Ninja 650 has been around for a long time.
The categories kind of come and then passed it in a way, but that bike still kind of sits there, right? Like a GSX-8R is technically a competition for Ninja 650, but it's kind of leaped it in some ways.
Yeah, it's getting long in the tooth, but it's still a very affordable motorcycle. And that's the other thing about these middleweight sport bikes, is the affordability. Like besides the RS 660, that thing does have a fairly high price tag that is touching up against those super hardcore super sports and the next gen super sports. Like it's an Aprilia, it's a racy bike, it's got a lot of tech, it's got, it's pretty good. And it's $11,500 just for the base model.
You're in Kawasaki ZX6 territory at that point.
Yeah, you are. You very much are. But then all the other ones we're talking about here, they're all less than $10,000, and some of them, I mean, we got to throw in CF Moto's 675 SS probably into this conversation too. 675 3-cylinder, it's $8,000. Like it is the least expensive. Granted, it's from CF Moto. It's not as well-known brand, but they're jumping in, and it's in the conversation, and it's got the price tag that is very, very desirable.
Yeah, this really seems to be the space that manufacturers want to be playing in right now. It's definitely where there's the most bikes, the most attention. I guess we didn't even mention, I don't even think it was on our list, but you have to mention Yamaha YZF7.
Yeah,
right. I mean,
R7.
that's and I think there's two very important things to understand or know when you're looking at this category. The first, I really try to call these sport bikes, not super sports. Mm-hmm. I try to make that delineation there. And I think that, just calling them that helps you realize that they are something a little different than, again, your traditional inline-fours or triple, super sport, race-derived, race-hardened bikes. So these are sport bikes that are, street machines first, but have sport bike looks with the full fairing and things like that, right?
Yeah, but they also have some features now that are not available on those super sports, like TC, like TFT dashes, like,
they're the bikes that are getting the attention for sure.
For sure. And I think that's, there's the cool part about, and like you said, they're sport bikes, but I still think that some people will call them super sports because they are mid displacement. They're still sport bikes, but they're just not as gnarly as the what we've grown up with, right? With the high revving.
It's a change in trends, and that's really what we're here to talk about.
And the change really started back in 2008 in the financial crisis. It really kicked off then. Sport bike racing was going gangbusters 2005, 2006, 2007, like, especially the super sport category. Like it was getting just as much attention, if not more, than the superbike category.
Yeah, you had your 2-year development cycles, right? And everything was about racing, and it was the win on Sunday, sell on Monday philosophy.
Yep. Right? Daytona was a 600 class. The Daytona 200 was a 600 class. And
still is technically.
Yeah. But I mean, back there was a time when it was a super bike category, right. And now they changed it to 600, and that just showed like there was an emphasis on these bikes, and then 2008 happened, and the people that had the money or the ability to finance bikes were older and gravitating towards different types of motorcycles. They were gravitating towards cruisers, adventure bikes, touring bikes. Sport touring bikes were kind of big at the time. So sport bikes were like being purchased by younger buyers and customers that didn't have the disposable funds to go down and plunk down a full buy on a motorcycle, right? They were financing their bikes. And when the financial crisis happened, you couldn't get financing on one of these things. And so like, you're looking at like almost an entire generation of potential sport bike buyers. They got left out. Like, I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but I have heard many times that, Suzuki was selling tens of thousands of GSXR 1000s and 600s in those years leading up. And then it was like, the numbers were like,
been like a big year. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it went to like, in the maybe 1,000 bikes because they couldn't finance anybody. Everyone that was buying those bikes was financing them. And that's just the reality of the time, is like younger riders want the sportier, gnarlier thing, and they couldn't buy it anymore. So their customer base just evaporated overnight. And so what you saw was like, there's no sport bikes being sold, which means there's not as much money to put into sport bike racing, which means there's not as much development, which means people aren't as interested. And it's like this snake that was eating its own tail, in the fact that one thing affected another all the way around the circle. And it just was this spiral into people not being able to buy them, two, not really caring because racing slowed down and the 2-year development cycle stopped, because a 2-year development cycle helps you sell motorcycles. It really does.
Yeah, right. We've got something new. Yeah.
You got to get the new.
Yeah,
I'm going to trade in.
Yeah,
I'm going to trade in my 2-year-old GSXR 600 for the new GSXR 600. Or I'm going to trade my Ninja in for the new. Like, people were brand loyal, and they would buy each time a new generation came out. And when it was every 2 years, that machine was jamming. But then there's no development money to do that anymore, and everything just languished. And it's, on top of that, down the road, emissions started coming in, and it made it harder for a high revving inline-four to meet current emission standards. And now, they figured that out. It took some time for manufacturers to figure out how to overcome these hurdles with proper fueling and, different valve timing and shift cams and, whatever they may do to get through. But before that, it was, like you said, like development. We're not going to change this bike because if we change it, we have to meet a different emission standard. We're not going to touch it. So then you just started getting these very long in the tooth models. So
yeah, and emissions regulations is it really is a big factor, and I mean, especially in the sport bike world, because again, using like that Kawasaki ZX6 as an example, a manufacturer that has gone out of their way to make sure the bike is compliant, it quite literally neutered the thing up top. Like, it just falls on its face up top because of, the valve timing and stuff that they've got, and the cam timing. And it's, that's not what you want from a sport bike, right? Yeah, we buy sport bikes because we want that ultimate performance. So yeah, they're having to make a lot of these sacrifices, and it takes some of that kind of cool factor off of these things. And I mean, massive kudos to Kawasaki for, making that investment and doing it. But yeah, the super sport bikes have definitely suffered the most. And I mean, I think manufacturers could, in my opinion, they could go out and build all new engines that, we were seeing it in the leader bike space, that meet these Euro 5 emission standards and aren't losing power. And they're, but the market is not supporting the market them in that way. The investment
can't support it. Like, it's different. Like, the people that are buying super sports, it's really hard to make a generalization about people that buy a certain segment of bikes. But I will say the people that are buying BMW M1000 RRs or S1000 RRs, people are buying Panigales, people that are buying RSV4s, they're a little bit more resilient to economic change, right? They tend to be maybe a little bit older or more financially stable, to where it doesn't matter to them as much in terms of being able to get financing, how much a month it's going to cost, or just going down and plunking down whatever it may cost for that bike. They got to have it. Where in the 600 class, that's not necessarily the case. And I think that's why you don't see a lot of development, is because the customer base isn't as resilient to economic change.
The other thing we do need to mention too is insurance rates. I think that's had a much bigger impact on 600cc super sports than probably any other class of bike. I would say. I mean, I think insurance rates for a younger rider, the guys, girls who are going and buying these bikes, it's a big factor. It's a big factor. You can walk into a dealership and look at one of those, and it might be half as much or more to finance, a Triumph Bonneville or something like that, right? And it's like, well, I would love to have this 600, but like financially, it just doesn't make sense for me. I can be over here.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. So enough doom and gloom. Let's talk about
yeah, right. Yeah.
Let's talk about where kind of like what we feel or we see the market is going. Adam, let's start with you. Like, what do you think is going to happen with the super sport? Bradley, I know you cringe every time I'm lumping all these motorcycles we talked about into the super sport category. Where do you see it going, Heath? But like, what's your thoughts on the future?
Well, with bikes like CF Moto's, inline-four, I think that product is, going to be the one that's going to cause the most headache for, the traditional, 4 or 5 big manufacturers. It's really cool that, Suzuki offers this GSX-8R and Honda's got its 4-cylinder CBR 650R, but these motorcycles they're nearing $10,000, and CF Moto is able to offer a similar package, and maybe doesn't look quite as cool, at least in my opinion, but it's got all those features and benefits. It's got the nice TFT display. It's got a lot of electronics, and the price is 30% less expensive than these name brand bikes, and I think that's going to be where the market is going to continue to shift, is these like lower cost sport bikes. It's cool.
Well, it just seems like there's less emphasis on performance, right? Like riders nowadays, they're like, I was going back and looking at I think it was like 2016, 2017, Cycle World did a 600cc shootout, and the top speed on those bikes was up 157 miles per hour then, and just like, is there a need for that for a street oriented, like what would that be if they continue the development of these bikes now, and it's like I think people are like, I don't really need that. I'm not going to do that on the street, right? They're not necessarily going to track days and racing maybe like in the same way that I think people were before. So it's like, I want the cool looks. I want sport bike looks, and I still need some performance and excitement out of it. And I want to be entertained when I ride it, but I don't need that like next level of performance in this space.
Well, I will say that, one of our recent articles, Sport Bikes Are Dying to Ride in 2025, was one of the best performing articles of the month. And so it shows that I think that there's a resurgent in the interest in sport bikes. And I think they've been gone. They've been here, but they haven't been getting much of attention, right? It's been adventure bike, cruiser, been the bikes that people have been talking about for the last 10 to 15 years. I think there's a newfound interest in sport bikes. There's a resurgence in it, and nostalgia. Like, you're like, oh man, I remember that FZR 600 poster I had up on my wall. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so people are interested in sport bikes again, and manufacturers are beginning to recognize that, and they're coming out with these next gens, like we said, with the Ducati, the Yamaha R9. And they're going to go racing those bikes, right? So they've built new bikes. They're going to go racing, and this may be the start of the next boom of sport bikes. We might see that in the next 5 to 10 years. Point.
Yeah, maybe we needed to take a step back before we could take 2 steps forward. Yeah, exactly. I don't know if you remember, Adam, when we were at the track a week or 2 ago. Our friend's son was out there on his GSX-R 600. Younger guy, and it was like really cool to see him and his buddy had a CBR 600, and it was like his first time doing a track day. We were talking to him about getting into sport bikes and track days and things like that, and he said he seemed to see a resurgence in interest. Right? Do you remember that, Adam?
Yeah. It was interesting. It was interesting quizzing him about that, and it's cool to see that. He said that some of his friends are really aspiring to that, and they have their eyes on sport bikes. We didn't get into make and model, but I thought that was really neat. Because I for sure, I mean, I see some kids riding sport bikes. Speaking of CBR 600RR, I saw an older one on the road the other day, maybe a 2017, and it's still, I'm sorry, 2007. It's 2007, and it still looked brand new. I'm like, oh my god, that's crazy. But it's cool to see that maybe younger people, are going to get back into it because sport bikes are cool. I mean, there's a lot of upside to them. I mean, yeah, they're kind of maybe uncomfortable, but they also have really good wind protection, and you can ride them on the freeway where naked bike's going to beat you up on the freeway. A sport bike generally isn't because of the big fairing and the tall windscreen. So yeah, I mean, we'll just see how things go. But I mean, everything in seems like everything is just cyclical, whether it's fashion,
Yeah.
or power sports. So
Yeah.
it wouldn't surprise me at all if all of a sudden these bikes are real popular again. But I don't think we're going to go back to the days of the 15,000 RPM, 600cc inline fours. Like those days are pretty much over, I think.
I don't know, to be honest, about that. Like that's the way performance creep or displacement creep or whatever you call it. Like, like right now we've got a bunch of bikes, right? And they're all pretty competitive. And so the manufacturers, they may want to outdo each other, right? And so, okay, so now all of a sudden, even these parallel twins, all of a sudden, instead of them revving to 11,000, now they're 12,000. Now they're 13,000.
They build an R model, and then
an R model.
Oh, we'll just do this, and yeah.
And we add some more R's, and we add some more R's, and in terms of letters on the tail section and in the tachometer, right? We're adding more R's and more R's, and before you know it, we could be back to the land of Bradley's Super Sport.
Yeah.
Like it may take 10 years, but I can guarantee you that the GSX 8R is not going to be the same GSX 8R it is today as it will be 10 years from now.
Yeah.
Right? It's going to make more power. It's going to have gnarlier suspension. It's going to cost more money. And I think that's going to happen in a lot of these bikes. Is we are going to see at some point racing is going to get popular again. More people are interested in sport bikes. More people are interested in racing, and that arms race is going to start again, and it's going to eventually go to that level, and then the same thing will happen. It'll just be too gnarly, and we'll have to start over. And we'll just keep doing that in perpetuity, going from too gnarly, go back to the start, get to too gnarly again, go back to the start, and those cycles may be 20 years long, but I expect that we are going to see some rad sport bikes in the next 10 years.
I appreciate the optimism. I think it'll be interesting, next year, really, we'll already start to see it when you have Yamaha and Ducati in World Supersport and other series, right? Mm-hmm. They've built this R9 and this new Panigale V2 that, again, based on our earlier conversation, everything they talk about street first, but it's like, when they show up at the racetrack, like they're taking it serious.
Very much so.
So it'll be really interesting to see how far they go with the development of those bikes. And I think, to your point, Justin, you're already going to start to see that development. Like, they started off as these, a little bit softer street bikes, but it's like pretty quickly you get that fire in your eyes, that kind of red mist as a manufacturer. Well, we got to beat them. We got to do this. Right.
Dude, there's going to be, if not next year, the year after, there's going to be a Panigale V2 special edition that's making an extra 10 or 15 horsepower, that's got an Aquapovic pipe on it and some crazy intake system or something that's going to push it to the next level. And then we're off to the races, dude.
They're
going to be back.
Yeah, I honestly am surprised at how much Yamaha, I've seen them already investing in that World Supersport program. Like I keep seeing stuff pop up on social media, them out testing. They've got, I think it's at least 2 teams in the World Supersport program, a factory and a support and a bunch of guys. And I mean, they are taking the development of that race bike very seriously, a lot more seriously than I expected. And I don't think there's been any announcements for Moto America just yet, but I'm almost certain, depending on bike availability, that you're going to see R9s racing in Moto America this year, obviously borrowing, hopefully, technology or what they're learning, over in the World Supersport program. But I am happy to see that, because I really thought they'd start to write off the racing element to it. And that doesn't seem to be the case at all, at least with the R9. Ducati talked about in their press release about, with the new V2, that they compared lap times. They said, yes, it is a little slower than last year's V2, but it was like 2/10 or something like that. But already they're when you already bring that comparison in, they're thinking about it like, okay, how do we start closing this gap?
Yeah, exactly.
So the other thing I did want to say that just I think is an important part of this conversation is going to that, working with Kawasaki last year on that ZX6 and going to the event and talking to those guys about why they invested in the platform. And I thought it was really interesting. They argued that their goal is to still sell ZX10s and things like that. And you need stepping stone bikes. You can't completely get rid of stepping stone models, right? People have to have that path. So if you get in on a Ninja 500 or a ZX4 or something now, you need something in that middle ground where people can stay in the manufacturer, right? They're not like, oh, now I'm going to go over here on this other brand bike because they have something. It's like,
because if you lose them, they don't come back usually.
Right. So I think it's that argument, we will continue to see some development in this space. It may not be the traditional super sport that I know and love, but and manufacturers are doing a good job. I'm shocked by how many R7s I see on the road, and maybe shock's not the right word because it is a great motorcycle.
It's a cool bike.
But it is really impressive how many of those I see on the road. I think Yamaha has done a great job of building a bike that's practical. They're able to use a motor that's used in other, platforms and other models throughout their lineup. So it's a utility thing for them. And, it's, I think it's a good business decision for them. But at the same time, it's a bike that looks cool and performs well enough for people to get out there and enjoy sport bike riding.
Absolutely. Coming up to the end of this thing, but traditional super sports might have gone away, but I don't think they're going to be gone for a while. But right now, technically, there are more options for someone that wants a mid-displacement sport bike now than there's ever been, right? And a very widespread of performance and options. You've got everything from Bradley's much beloved real super sports to the next gen to the middleweight sport bikes, right? You're covering a huge range of buyers now compared to a very narrow band back in the day.
That is cool. So, you're right. Twins, cool. Triples, fours, all of it. Committed ergos, less committed, non-adjustable suspension, adjustable. You are right that there is more out there than there really has been.
Absolutely. Really. And mark my words, Bradley's Super Sports will be back. Check back on this video in 10 years.
Yeah. I like
it. Bookmark it. So thanks for watching. Give us your thoughts for watching and listening. Thanks. Give us your thoughts on the middleweight super sport category. Are you interested in Bradley's type of super sport? Are you pumped on the new parallel twin middleweight type of thing, or do these new next gens get you pumped? Tell us about your sport bike experience and if sport bikes are even a thing for you, or what you're excited about, what you're excited to see. We'd love to hear it. As always, we appreciate your support. We love that you're listening. Hit the like button, and we'll see you on the next one.